One of the big goals of this quarter is to learn how to create constructive communication climates. This is really the highlight of being able to competently and effectively communicate with others across different scenarios. So that's what we're covering in this chapter. The focus questions here are: what kinds of communication foster defensive and supportive communication climates? In what ways can conflict enrich a relationship? How can we confirm both ourselves and others? And when is it appropriate to show grace toward others? I've broken down for you the aspects of different types of communication within the supportive communication climate and the defensive communication climate. And on the next slide, I'll give you some more information about each, but sometimes it's useful to just see it all laid out. So, as with most things in communication, these are aspects which all function on a continuum, right? So we don't have all or nothing. Things can be more descriptive than evaluative, more evaluative than descriptive. It's very hard to be black and white. So each of these is described in the textbook. Here's just a quick overview of them. If you're creating a supportive climate, what we're aiming for is communication behaviors that are focused on description. And so they more describe a situation and use I statements. We use provisionalism, which means we're open to other possibilities. There's spontaneity, so even though this is thought out, this is honest and straightforward communication. There's a problem orientation, so we want to resolve tensions and issues. We have empathy, which indicates our concern for others. Then we focus on equality, which means we imply this respect and equivalent status of the people we're interacting with. On the flip side, when we're creating defensive and disconfirming and really negative communication environments, some of the behaviors that happen is that we tend to evaluate others, and so we judge more than describe. There's more a sense of certainty, and so instead of saying, here's different possibilities, we say, this is the one answer. It's very dogmatic, it's very absolute. Instead of being spontaneous, we're more concerned with strategy, being manipulative, and keeping our motives and interests hidden in order to get what it is we want out of the situation. In defensive climates, they're more concerned with control and dominating others than with resolving tensions. There's more a concern with neutrality, so not indicating your concern for others and really being indifferent towards them. And then we more often see superiority than we do equality, right? So implying that we're better than the other person rather than equal to. So again, each of these are discussed more thoroughly within the chapter, but I've laid them out here for you because we want to go for supportive climate. We want a confirming climate and environment in which to interact with others. And so these are some of the communicative behaviors that help create that, and we're going to talk in more detail about how we accomplish some of these. So it's important to talk about conflict. Conflict is inevitable, and so we do need to learn how to deal with it effectively. So conflict is something that occurs when interdependent people perceive incompatibility in their goals, their interests, their values, right? So it's possible that they're not actually incompatible, but the parties involved perceive that incompatibility. They don't see how they're working towards the same things. And it's important to note here is that this is people who affect one another's lives. So if it's someone who doesn't affect us at all, we often aren't in conflict because it's not worth the time or effort. They don't have an effect on us. So conflict can be positive. Conflict signals a need for change within a relationship or within a situation. It allows for us to diagnose problems because ideally in conflicts we're talking things out and we're trying to describe your perspective versus theirs, and so it allows you to see where those disconnects are happening. And what also happens is, as I mentioned, we tend to only have conflict with people we are interdependent with, and so it demonstrates that we care about this person. They're only worth having conflict with because we want them in our lives or need them in our lives. So conflict just is a perceived incompatibility. So there are three major steps to the conflict process. The first is to consider whose interests are at play here, right? So who's involved? There are orientations within conflict, and what this means is how do you feel towards conflict? What is your orientation toward it? Are you someone who feels like it's a win-win, a win-lose, a lose-lose? And so here's a little bit more about what that means. Right? A win-win is this idea that both I and you win. A win-lose is either I'm going to win and you're going to lose, which is ideal, or you're going to win and I'm going to lose. Right? Or a lose-lose is I don't even care, right? As long as right, as long as you don't win, I don't care if I lose too. Right? So the diagram that I've given you here has a little bit more detail than the one in the book. And notice it also talks about being assertive, and that's a key concept coming out of the chapter that we'll spend some more time with. So the orientations are, what's your overall feeling towards conflict? Then we also have responses to conflict, right? So this is whose interests are involved, this is how I feel towards conflict, how I'm oriented towards it, and this is how I respond to conflict. And so this happens on a couple different levels. You'll notice that this chart shows that there are some versions of responses that are far more destructive, right? So this is the end of the continuum that's destructive, the end of the continuum that's constructive. Some are far more passive, and some responses are more active. And the other keywords here are overt and covert. So overt is very open and expressive. Covert is more that hidden, right? Spies are covert. So we have 4 different ones here. We have exit, voice, neglect, and loyalty. And so the most active and constructive is voice, and that's where we're actually going to talk about the issue. Exit means, right, you just duck out, right? You actively avoid, you actively kind of step out of it. Neglect is you don't even want to talk about the problem, so it's very destructive because you're not addressing it at all. And loyalty is, okay, I'm gonna let you win because this is right. I want to move forward, and this is just going to be the best way to do that. So I'm going to be loyal to the cause rather than standing up for myself. So another way to think about this, another series of terms to use, and we can see here that these are gauged on a term of assertiveness, which is I'm focusing on my needs, my desired outcome, and my agenda, and then also cooperativeness. All right, so the more you're cooperative is further down here, the more you're assertive is further up here. So these are 3 different types of conflict modes. So competing, zero-sum orientation means no one's going to win, right? Or it's an all or nothing, basically. I'm going to win, you're going to lose, or vice versa. Avoiding, totally withdrawing from the situation. Accommodating, this is that loyalty piece of like, okay, this is, I just want to maintain harmony, so whatever you want, we can do. Compromising, interestingly enough, we often talk about as being very positive, like in everyday language, we just need to compromise. It's important to remember that compromising is actually everyone's giving a little something up, right? So yeah, we're all gonna we're okay with the ending. This is really the very bottom level of what's going to be acceptable to everybody. And so it'll leave our relationship ideally undamaged, but it's still not the ideal. The ideal that we want to aim for, as I mentioned when we were talking about groups, is the idea of collaboration, right? We are open to new possibilities that we hadn't thought of before. And so we really are aiming for a win-win outcome. So these are some different language to use for types of conflict. So when we look at constructive and destructive conflict, here are some elements of it, right? Because constructive conflict can get us far. It helps us diagnose problems. It helps us sort out new ways to move forward. It helps us find new ways to work with people. So when we're working in constructive conflict, we're very we-oriented. We're trying to de-escalate the anger, de-escalate the conflict. We're focused on cooperation. We're flexible to different options. We're open to negotiation. We're very much pursuing dialogue and talking things out, and we're being supportive with one another. Right? It's going back to that supportive climate. Destructive conflict, on the other hand, it's very me or I oriented. We are definitely escalating the issues. We're competing. We're not flexible. We're very inflexible about what we're willing to do. We're trying to dominate. Instead of having dialogue and talking things out, we're just cross-complaining and judging instead of describing. We're very focused on defensiveness, and there's probably an element of retaliation. I want to get you back. Right? So I'd like you to pause and take a minute, and especially as you're working in groups, and I expect you have to a lot for work and school, as you think about destructive conflict and constructive conflict, what are 3 to 5 guidelines you think are should just be standard, universal? If I want to create constructive conflict within a group, right, here's a guideline I should stand by. So take a minute, pause, and write down the example for yourself. When we're trying to resolve conflicts, it's important to remember that there's a lot of obstacles within that attempt, right? So as we try and resolve conflict, maybe there are individual obstacles we have to get over, such as knowledge, self-esteem, people's values, their skills. Maybe there's relationship obstacles, your reputations, organization, the positions. Perhaps there's environmental obstacles, right? Physical environment, political environment, the company culture if you're at work. Maybe there are informational obstacles. What are the facts versus the opinions versus the perspectives? And really kind of what's the issue definition? And what the issue itself is affected by all of these different types of obstacles, which is why dialogue between parties is so important to even make sure you're on the same page about what the issue is and to try and eliminate as many of these obstacles as possible. And I've also included tips for resolving conflict. Down at the bottom is a Virginia number. So it's the Conflict Resolution Center. There are numerous local resolution centers, but these are some general conflict mediation guidelines which are useful to bear in mind. So choosing a good time and place to talk, and remembering also that it needs to be a safe place, right? So safe in both in the physical and the emotional sense. This is somewhere where people feel like they can talk, and it's actually a safe issue. So if someone's in physical danger, you would need to remove them from that before you could ever address the conflict. You both need to commit to finding a solution that satisfies each person's needs. You need to listen carefully and restate what you've heard. You need to remain calm and avoid becoming defensive. Talk about the issues, not the people. Use I statements. Acknowledge points of agreement. Describe your emotions. Be specific in describing what you need. And be open to creative solutions. With the idea of conflict and building a supportive climate is this idea of confirming communication, right? So we both need to confirm ourselves and we need to confirm others. And so on some of the previous slides, we've seen discussions of aggressive versus assertive versus passive. So we'll spend some more time here with that. And then check in your book for the Sharpen Your Skills box on page 150 to look at what it means to be assertive. Assertive is really the goal that we're going for here. And then we're going to talk about confirming others. And so we have this idea of confirming and disconfirming messages. And these are really crucial to everyday interactions as well as to moments of conflict. And so there's some good examples in the textbook on page 137, and I'll provide some more within the lecture slides. So when we confirm ourselves, we are aiming for assertive communication, right? So this means that we are both considerate of others, but we're also open about our own needs. And so our goal here is to be assertive in the sense that I clearly express that we both have rights, that we both have needs, and that we need to aim for both of those to be met. I'm not going to give up everything for you, and I don't expect you to give up everything for me, but I am going to clearly state this is what I need in this situation. Particularly for women in work situations, this is something that a lot of women have been socially trained to become more passive and to step back and value other people's needs before their own. But really it's important that everybody be able to step back and say, these are my needs, and this is how they can be met, and here's how they can be met while not stepping on somebody else's needs. So pause and take a look over this pretty large chart, and the idea here is to give you a sense of what does it look like when something's passive, what does it look like when communication is aggressive, and how do we find that balance point of being assertive somewhere in the middle. And so down at the bottom you can see they've also offered tips for how to communicate assertively, giving examples of I statements, giving examples of how to describe how another person's behavior makes you feel, not saying you're a jerk, but when you spend all day playing video games instead of helping clean the house as you said you would, I feel angry and disappointed, right? So you're describing behavior, not the person. And it's also important is how do you stick to your guns? So there's some examples there for you. When we confirm others, it requires listening. We've talked about effective listening and how to do that and obstacles to it, and it's really crucial to build a supportive climate and to confirm others with your communication. You first have to effectively listen. There are three levels of confirming others: recognition, acknowledgement, and endorsement. Recognition is that basic element of recognizing that someone exists, right? So you're in the hallways and the janitor's also there. Do you say hello as you pass? Right? If you're the only two people in the elevator, do you ignore their existence? Do you talk to them? Do you say hello when someone enters a room? Right? So these are just small pieces that say, I recognize that you're there and that you're worthy of attention. So acknowledgement is the next most confirming behavior. And acknowledgement says not just you're going to recognize they're there, you're then going to pay attention to them, right? You're going to listen if they want to talk. You're going to spend some time with them, right? You're going to say, that this is worth your time, worth the effort, that they are worth the time and effort. The most confirming activity is endorsement. And this is where you actively validate someone's feelings and validate their thoughts as real and as important, right? You recognize how they're feeling. You acknowledge that they're allowed to feel that way. And you acknowledge that their feelings are for them facts, right? Just because you might not feel the same way in that situation doesn't mean that they can't. So an important question I have for you to think about is when you're stressed out and you've hit finals week and you're sick and there's so many things going on, when someone comes to you and says, "Don't worry, you'll be fine," is that confirming? We do it a lot. We often say, "Don't worry, you'll be fine." Interestingly enough, doing that is actually a disconfirming message because what you've told someone is, you may have all these tests and you're worried about your grades and you're sick and someone in the family's not well. Don't worry about it, right? That's what that does is that says those things aren't worth worrying about. You shouldn't be worrying about them. And it disconfirms that that's really how someone feels. And so instead of telling someone, "Don't worry, you'll be fine," imagine if instead someone says, "Wow, that sounds really stressful. I can understand why you're feeling like that. Would it help if while you study, I make dinner or I sweep the floor?" Right? And so imagine having that person confirm, "I realize this is how you're feeling. It's valid to feel that way. I understand why you feel that way. And how can we try and improve this?" Right? Because "don't worry, you'll be fine" doesn't fix anything. So take a minute. There are examples listed on page 137. I've also offered some more examples within the additional resources, but make note of what are some examples of an actual statement to make or a situation for each of these levels of confirming messages. So, some more examples for you because it is such an important skill. How do you shift from a disconfirming to confirming messages, right? How do you change from evaluative to description, from certainty to provisionalism, from strategy to spontaneity, from control to problem, from neutrality to empathy, and from superiority to equality, right? So think about how you're saying something. What's the relational content, the relational message that you're getting across when you use one phrase versus another, right? So how do we actually build supportive communication climates by confirming the people we are interacting with?